Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stacy, and I'm a bookseller and the events coordinator at Belmont Books. Belmont Books, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we have a number of virtual events coming up, including a holiday romance panel tomorrow night, as well as Marie Myung OK Lee in conversation with Mary H.K. Choi on Thursday night. You can register for these and our other events on our website, belmontbooks.com, which is also where you can purchase tonight's book, The Lying Life of Adults. A reminder to please keep your audio and video turned off. Any questions can be sent via the chat, and Anne and Crystal will answer as many as possible after the presentation. We're very excited to welcome Anne and Crystal, and I want to tell you a little bit about them, and then I will turn the event over to them. Anne Goldstein is the English translator of all of Elena Ferrante's books. She's also translated Primo Levi and Jhumpa Lahiri, as well as a host of other great Italian language writers living and dead. She is head copy editor at The New Yorker, which she joined in 1974. Her latest work, the translation of The Lying Life of Adults, is the first Ferrante novel to be published since the best-selling Neapolitan Quartet. Anne is now one of the most sought-after translators of Italian literature, although she is not formally trained. She got her start in translation with a story by Aldo Buzzi and received the Pen Renato Pogioli, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, prize for her rendition of his collection, Journey to the Land of the Flies. She picked up Italian through an after-hours language class at The New Yorker in hopes of reading Dante's Divine Comedy. Anne considers herself an enabler of words. Crystal King is an author, culinary enthusiast, and marketing expert. Her writing is fueled by a love of history and a passion for the food, language, and culture of Italy. She has taught classes in writing, creativity, and social media at several universities, including Harvard Extension School and Boston University, as well as at Grub Street. Crystal is a Pushcart Prize nominated poet and former co-editor of the online literary arts journal Plum Ruby Review. She lives in Boston, but considers Italy her next great love after her husband Joe and their two cats, Nero and Merlin. She's the author of The Chef's Secret and Feast of Sorrow. And I'm just going to ask one more time if everybody could please turn their video off. And I'm going to turn the event over. Oh, and Crystal's muted. Okay, hang on one second, Crystal. Let me find you and get you unmuted. Where are you? Sorry. Okay. Did that work? No.
Okay, I muted because my caveat is that I have cats and they like to be part of the conversation and they were choosing to do so at an inappropriate moment. So thank you so much. I am delighted to be here with Anne. I've been a big fan of Elena Ferrante for a long time, but I'm also somebody who is very interested in the world of translation because I am somebody who also writes books that are set in Italy, and some of my books have been translated into Italian. And so I have a whole bunch of questions for Anne that I hope that will be not only enlightening for me, but for you as well. And so Anne, I really want to start out talking about your experience as a translator. We'll kind of start there, and then we're going to talk all about The Lying Life of Adults, which if you have not yet read it, definitely click the links that Belmont Books sends out and purchase it because it's amazing. So Anne, there are two types of people in the publishing world that I personally really I appreciate a great deal in the process of the books that I write. And that is the copy editor, who I have a real love-hate relationship with.
Like most writers.
Yes. But I have such respect for the copy editing. It's not an easy job. And the translation is not easy either. And you do both, which I am just so fascinated by. And as I mentioned, somebody who's trying to learn the language and translate and do some translations on my own, your story in particular is really fascinating to me and very inspiring. And I'd love if you could talk to the viewers here today and tell them what your experience has been and how did you end up being a translator?
Well, first of all, I quit the copy editing business a few years ago so that I could be a full-time translator.
But you were a copy editor for quite some time,
Yes,
right?
yeah, more than like 40 something years.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was my day job. But I didn't learn Italian until I was really in my late 30s. So I feel like that should be inspiring too, that you can, like start something totally new when you're later in your life. And the reason that I learned Italian, I mean, I always had sort of wanted to learn Italian. I knew French. I mean, I studied French and I studied Latin. And Italian seemed kind of natural. But I read Dante in college, and I really wanted to read Dante in Italian. And when I was so about quite a few years after that, one of my colleagues also decided she would be interested in learning Italian. So she knew someone who could actually teach us Italian, and we had, as Stacy said, we had this class at the New Yorker. And we studied grammar for about a year, and then we read Dante. We read the entire Divine Comedy. I mean, over a period of several years, like one canto a week. But we actually did it. It was kind of amazing. But so about 5 years after we started studying Italian, the editor of the New Yorker at the time was this person named Robert Gottlieb, and the artist Saul Steinberg. He's the person who's famous for, New York is the center of the world and everything else is tiny. But he had a friend named Aldo Buzzi who had written this book, and he gave it to Bob Gottlieb. I don't know what he expected Bob to do with it, but Gottlieb handed me the book and said, just take a look. I've got to say something nice to Saul. He knew I was studying Italian.
Yeah.
And I looked at the book and I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. And I decided to translate it. Just for myself, because I thought it would be an interesting way of studying Italian, of looking at a different way of looking at the language. In other words, wouldn't be just reading, it wouldn't be just studying, doing exercises in grammar. It would be sort of a combination of reading and grammar and just looking at the language in a different way.
It's a fantastic way to practice, definitely.
So yeah, exactly. So I did. So I translated it. I mean, I did it just for myself, but then it got published. So. I mean, I was very lucky, in a way, because it's not a kind of book that, I don't know, it wasn't, like a sort of blockbuster type of.
But it definitely got you started.
But it got me
where
started.
You could do the blockbuster.
Exactly. So that's really how I started. As I was sort of saying before, earlier we were talking, I mean, most translators I know have a story like that where they just, almost accidentally started translating. I mean, something happened, somebody said they needed something, or my friend, one of my friends, Jenny McPhee, the first book she translated was a book by the Pope. I mean, that
Wow.
House, they needed a translation quickly, and they knew she knew Italian, so it was like, so it's just one of these sort of serendipitous things.
So how do you think that being a copy editor might have helped you when you started down that path?
Well, I mean, and again, to quote Stacey, I mean, they're both jobs that are enabling jobs in a sense. I mean, what you're doing at the New Yorker, we used to say that we were, people would always accuse the New Yorker of saying, oh, you make everybody sound the same, which isn't true. I think that we go out of our way actually to make every writer sound as much like him or herself as possible. I mean, within certain limits.
Right.
But I think that as a translator, I mean, I think it's a similar kind of goal, is that you want the person to be, the writer in Italian to be his or her best version in English. And the work of that is similar. I mean, in the sense that it requires a great deal of attention to language on a pretty micro level. I mean, you have to
Yeah.
be able to read it on another level too, but you really have attention to detail is crucial in both, I think.
So most people don't really know how, I'm imagining people who are not writers
Mhm.
may not know how authors and translators work together, or maybe I should say don't work together. Because,
Right.
so for example, I've had my books translated into different
Yeah, I
languages,
was going to ask you about
and
that.
I had no direct connection with any of them, except the Italian one. I did request that I could review the manuscript. And
Uh-huh.
when they gave it to me, I think they gave me a week, which my Italian is not quite that good.
Uh-huh.
So I had a dear friend who helped me work through it just to make sure that I
Mhm.
could go through it and look and see, but I didn't have time to really understand if the nuance was all there. Unfortunately, it was. But it's fascinating to read your own work, be able to read your own work in a different language. And I could give some feedback. It was just
Mhm.
some comments where maybe there was just a nuance that wasn't quite right, or some small things that were misunderstood. But for the
Mhm.
most part, authors and translators don't actually talk to each other. Everything goes through the publisher. And so I know that you have said that, at least with Elena, that has been true for you.
Mhm.
And so I have a couple questions relating to that. Do you
Mhm.
think that this process is good or bad or helpful or hindering potentially?
You mean working with the author?
Yeah, or not
Well,
working with the author.
it depends. I mean, it totally depends. I actually haven't worked with that many authors. But then again, I've also translated a lot of dead authors, or in the case of Ferrante, an absent author.
Yes.
So it can really go both ways. I mean, actually, Aldo Buzzi, the first person that I translated, I did work quite a lot with him. And sometimes it was helpful, but sometimes it was really not helpful. Because first of all, he would rewrite all the time, and that was really annoying. And then the other problem is that often, well, not often, sometimes the writer thinks that he or she knows English better than he or she does. So, they're making suggestions, and you have to say, no, that's not right. It really should be this. So that's another pitfall. But I haven't, that hasn't happened to me that much. On the other hand, there's writers like another writer that I've translated a lot of is Alessandro Barrico. I think his most well-known book is called Silk, but he wrote a wonderful book called City, which is very complicated, but I mean, of course it got no attention because it was a translated book. It's actually called City in Italian, but it has like this sort of philosopher character who's, always making these amazing statements. So there was, at least one place where I just had no idea what he was talking about. And I happened to be in touch with Barrico. And so I asked him about it. I said, what does this mean? So he looked at it and he said, oh, get rid of it. So, it can be really helpful.
Yeah.
They're slightly extreme examples, but I think it can work both ways. But I'm surprised that you haven't, that you haven't gotten questions from the translator.
I do get some. I'll get usually what would happen is I get one big document that would come from the publisher that says the translator has all these questions, and then I can answer within that document and it goes back. So
I see.
So I haven't had any direct connection to the translators.
So have you asked and they're just like, no, it's better if you don't, kind of thing? Or that's just the formal way?
Where I'm like, should I? I don't know if I should. I'd like to. I'd love to thank my translators.
Yeah.
But there's this weird barrier that the publishers I think, put up too, where authors are not always expected or wanted in the process.
Yeah, well, it depends, I guess.
It also probably protects you too, though, I guess, because
Yeah.
if you have an author who thinks they know better and maybe doesn't.
Right. No, that's complicated. On the other hand, sometimes an author can really clarify something.
Yeah.
I mean, even a simple thing like a word that could mean two things or three things.
Right. And nuance is also such
and nuance as well. Exactly. Yeah. you can say, is this the strongest nuance? Is that, I mean, the one other experience that I could just mention is translating Jhumpa Lahiri, who's of course a writer in English. I mean, when I translated her book, which is about learning Italian, I mean, I wasn't trying to sound like Jhumpa Lahiri in any way. And so, we worked together a little bit, but most of the changes that she wanted to make were just word choices.
Right.
So she just, and of course I was, I went along with it because she knew what she was talking about.
She knew both.
But it was just interesting to me that it was just, that was really the issue, like a slightly different word or a slightly different nuance, as you say.
Well, we always like to fool with our words too,
Yeah.
I know that I will look at a paragraph and think, 2 months later and realize, oh, I shouldn't have written it that way. So,
well, yeah, we all have that problem.
So you've also had the opportunity that a lot of translators don't, which is to be the face of a book. And that's because Elena Ferrante wants to protect her identity. Normally it's the author that is doing the book tours.
Right.
So you're in a really interesting position. And in the sense that you are partly author in a way. Your words entwine with hers. You bring your skill and your perspective into the work that you're translating. And so you're taking the original story and transforming it into something that it's hers, but it's also a little bit yours. And at the same time, it must be an interesting position to be in, because but it must be also sometimes a strange position to be in. Like, I saw one of the questions that came up was, have you met Elena? Or I had somebody, when I mentioned that I would be interviewing you, somebody said, well, I heard she is Elena.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm sure you've heard all of these rumors. So maybe you can talk a little bit about like the strangeness of being the face of her book. And I imagine it's probably also wonderful at the same time too.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it is strange because after all, I didn't write the book. I mean, I can't really speak as the author of the book. So I like to always make that clear. I mean, I can't say, how did this book begin, or, anything really about the writing of the book in a sense. But it's a good position to be in, because I think it's good for translators. It's good for people to recognize that when they're reading a translated book, there's a person between them and the author, in a sense, or not between them and the book, between them and the author. I mean, someone who's brought them this book who isn't the author. It's like in book, in reviews, when they quote, sometimes they'll quote like, paragraphs and paragraphs and say, and talk about the author's style. But really, they're talking about the translator's style. I mean, it is the author's style, but it's also the translator who's done that work. So it's a little bit, so I think that having the translator out there, in a sense, is good for translation.
Oh, definitely. I know that a lot of translators don't get their name on the book. They're often.
Oh yeah, no, I know. I hardly ever get my name on the book.
So it's nice, probably, like to. I know that there's a lot of movements out there too to try to find ways to get more visibility for translators.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening. I mean, there's a lot more. There's some big prizes now, sort of name. There's there's the Booker Translation Prize. There's also a in the Lisa Lucas at the National Book Foundation, whatever it's called. Anyway, there's a National Book Award for translation now. So and then there's a bunch of other ones too. So that's really.
I imagine there's probably a lot of authors who would support that. I certainly.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
That somebody can help my books get into other languages.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's good. It's good in both directions.
Yeah.
That this is it's just another aspect of literature. I guess.
So, one of the questions before we start talking about the book, the last question I have about like you and your experience is that the idea of how learning a language can help you understand the culture of the people that you're learning the language for. And translation kind of takes that to a completely different level, because you really have to dig in and understand intent and purpose and nuance and all sorts of things. And you mentioned that you had been translating Pier Paolo Pasolini. You've translated Primo Levi. How do you think that translation has helped you understand the culture of Italy and its people?
Oh, there's no question that it's just it's an incredible gold mine of understanding. Because I mean, really, sometimes I I find out something. I ask somebody, let's say, about a word or something, and I find a whole layers of meaning in that word, and I just think of both meaning and, let's say, culture and cultural history, and you just suddenly think, wow, what am I missing? You think every word perhaps has, I can't think of a good example, but it happens all the time, that you just, so yes, I mean, you could say, well, every word has a little nugget of culture in it. But certainly, yeah, I mean, it's of literary culture, of history, I don't know, of all kinds of.
I think one of the things for me that it has helped me, it helps me understand how they think.
Yeah, that's also true.
Because you actually form your words differently. You form your sentences differently. Your emphasis on things is different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. That's a good point. I mean, and because the sentence structure is different, you can't just translate the sentence structure from one language to the next. You have to find ways of compensating for, for the emphasis of the sentence, let's say.
Let's hope Google Translate never gets that good.
No, I don't think so. It's gotten a lot better.
It has. It's actually kind of interesting how much better it has gotten.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about The Lying Life of Adults, which I think you have the book there. If
Yes.
Anyone has not seen the cover yet. You remember those days when we used to go to bookstores and we could see the cover? So, and I believe that there's a link in the chat too to purchase it.
Yeah.
So I think this is your 6th or 7th novel of hers that you've translated.
It's actually, I think it's more like the 10th. I mean, it depends how you count. I mean, I've translated all her novels. It depends how you count the Neapolitan novels, if you count them as 1 or as 4.
I was thinking 4.
There are 3 earlier novels. There are those 4. There's The Lying Life of Adults. And then there's the book called The Frantumaglia, which is a collection of interviews and letters and sort of outtakes. And there's something else. There's a children's book.
Oh, okay.
And there might be I think there might be something else that I'm not thinking of. But anyway, so
it's a lot.
there's a lot of Elena Ferrante.
And this particular book is somewhat different than I think her other books.
Yeah.
And it's a novel, of course, the title says a lot.
Yes.
It's this title about lying and learning to lie and how we lie to each other, how we lie to ourselves. It's a coming of age story, but it also deals with the awkwardness. So it deals with the awkwardness and the confusion of being a teen, but then you also get the glimpses into the messiness of adult life and how people don't always navigate that very well. If you had to describe this story to somebody who had never heard of this book, what would you tell them?
Well, I don't know. You just did a pretty good job.
But I told you I talked about the themes, but like somebody who knows nothing about the book.
I mean, it's a teenage girl. Basically, it's a teenage girl dealing with the issues of being a teenage girl, of growing up, of dealing with her adults, with her parents, her adults, well, her parents and other adults, and learning about life, really. I mean, learning how to but it does have a lot of the I mean, when I first started translating this, I thought, oh my God, I don't really want to be a teenage girl again. Because, all these issues like physicality, sex, what do adults mean, school, boys, I mean, all these things. And she's dealing with the
Divorce.
city of Naples,
Yeah.
class issues, her family. I mean, it's sort of got a lot of stuff.
Yes. Yes. This is, I think, one of the most jam-packed books I've read in a while when it comes to layering of
Uh-huh.
really heavy themes.
Yeah.
And some of those themes that kind of thread through the novel, it really all get their start with the idea of ugliness. And Giovanna, who's the main character, she overhears her father suggesting to her mother that she is as ugly as her aunt. And Vittoria, who is who does not get along with her father. And we start to learn that Vittoria is less physically ugly than maybe her personality is. And she's a crude, mean, domineering sort of person. And at the same time, she holds this magnet-like hold on Giovanna. Talk about your perception of the relationship between the two. And of course, that means you have to probably talk a little bit about the bracelet.
Oh, yeah. I
That
wasn't
was one of the other
thinking.
things that went all the way through the book is this
Yeah,
bracelet.
I mean, it's kind of the bracelet, just as an aside, the bracelet is kind of amazing because you would think, oh, well, you know, there's this like bracelet symbol, this bracelet that's real, that's a symbol, and you think, oh, that sounds just so sort of crude, but it's very brilliantly done. You never think of it as, at least I never did. I never thought, oh, this is just too obvious or too, I don't know, banal or something. It has a kind of charm quality or talismanic quality that and it goes through, it changes possession. I mean, its possessor changes a lot throughout the book, and it does symbolize various things, which
The
whoever,
shifts in the relationships between the people.
yeah, right. Actually, the cover of the Italian book is an arm. I don't know, you may have seen it.
I don't think
I
I've
don't
seen
have
that one,
a
no.
copy of it, but it is an arm with a bracelet on
Oh,
it.
which makes sense.
Yeah. But anyway, so Vittoria she's the father of Giovanna. I don't think this is giving away too much. The father of Giovanna, they live in a middle class part of
You mean the aunt.
Naples. I'm sorry?
You said her father.
No, I know, but her family, the family lives in a middle class part of Naples. I realized I had to back up a second. But the father has come from a poor working class part of Naples, and his sister still lives there, and the rest of his family. And therefore, he would like to have no relationship with the part of Naples and the family that he came from. But for Giovanna, Aunt Vittoria, who is part of that other Naples, is a kind of freedom. She represents a kind of freedom from her parents, who are her middle class
She's
parents.
rebelling by seeing her even.
I'm sorry?
He rebels by even going
By seeing her, yeah. Victoria is a rebellion and an escape. And at first she seems like the wonderful polar opposite, but of course, everything has shades of shades. Nuances.
I thought it was, I don't think I realized this till I was finished with the book, but they're both divas. They are both very dramatic characters, and they live their life in these emotional, dramatic ways.
But Victoria is not a teen. I mean, Giovanna is a teenager, and it's sort of, when you're a teenager, life is dramatic. Everything is dramatic and intense and, kind of black and white and extreme. I mean, Victoria is an adult, and yet to her, she's still kind of living her life that way. But yeah, I mean, all the characters are so complicated. I think that's one of the great strengths of Ferrante.
All of them are really rounded. Even some of the secondary characters still have a real sense of it's masterful in that regard. From another author who wishes to write characters like that, definitely.
Yeah.
Along the lines of ugliness, one of the things that may surprise readers that had read the Neapolitan Quartet is the tone and the style of this story seems a lot harsher and a little bit more direct. And the characters often say and do really vulgar things. And there's a grittiness to the book that is a little bit different. What was it like to translate this book in comparison to some of her other novels?
Well, for one thing, I feel that none of the characters are very likable in this
Mhm.
book. And so it's hard to really, it's kind of, I mean, in a way you could say this is a great feat of the writer of Ferrante, but there's sort of no one you really want to identify with or feel close to.
But you still want to keep reading.
But you want to keep reading, exactly. But that's it, because you nevertheless become like so caught up in their lives that you just want to, you do care what happens to them, even though they're not very nice people. Sort of none of them. They all are kind of have some quality that makes them a little bit unlikable.
Yeah, I think. Oh, that's not true. I would say Roberto.
Oh, Roberto, yeah. But now Roberto, I mean, he's a fascinating character. I mean, do you take it? I just took him at face value, but other people think that there's something manipulative about him.
So Roberto is he's kind of the knight in shining armor. He's the untouchable hero of the story. He's the handsome man that Giovanna has a massive crush on.
And like her father, he also has left his working class background. But he doesn't seem to have lost touch with it.
Yes.
He has deliberately stayed in touch with it.
I thought that it was interesting because the relationships between the families, they're so much more complex than I think I've read from in ways from her other books. And they're entwined with each other. They play off of each other. There's these layers of lies that all of them tell, and they tell themselves and they tell each other. And
right.
It's really interesting to see how all of the lies lock everybody together and push each other apart.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, lying is definitely, it's a grand theme. It's both a theme and a fact. I mean, part of the story, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it is, the families are very entwined. I mean, in many different ways and many different families.
Yes.
Or several.
Yeah, three main families, essentially.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the complexity of the lies within the novel. So Giovanna's always watching all of the people around her lying. And sometimes it's outright lying and she knows they're lying. Sometimes she uncovers a deception. Sometimes it's an exaggeration, or it might even just be an omission of information. And so, like all children start to do, they start to test the waters about their own lies and what they can get away with. And so for all of the lying and the guilt that the adults and the adolescents in the book have about the lies is also complex. And I was struck in particular that most of the characters don't see, they seem to own their lies. They are aware that they're lying and they're okay with their lies, and they don't always feel regret for telling them. Did you find, I mean, we expect people to feel bad about that. And she plays with that, I think, in a way that is interesting.
Yeah, well, but I think a lot of the lies that they tell are to protect themselves. I mean, they feel that they're necessary. I think they feel, that they're necessary lies, one way or another.
So it counteracts what guilt they might have.
Right, exactly. So there's sort of no guilt involved. I mean, or well, maybe there's some guilt, but yeah, doesn't seem to be a lot of guilt.
No.
Yeah,
and I think that's what would make characters more likable, is if they felt some guilt about their actions, I'm guessing.
Yes, true. That's a good point. Yeah.
You want them to feel a little more bad than they might actually. But again, that's partly what makes it so fascinating. You're like, I keep thinking, how are they going to move forward with this? And then they move forward, and in a way that's almost stunning sometimes. And so,
Yeah.
So one of the other line thread that runs through the books is the idea of that desire and the deception that desire brings.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
you
well,
have,
that's one of the big lies.
right. So you have the affairs of the adults in the story. You have the raw emotional love that, like Victoria, that ends in
Mhm.
some despair. You have the fumbling desires of the boys in the book, and they're really fumbling and awkward.
Yeah.
And and then you have her infatuation with Roberto, and there's a lot of deception involved there.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your sense of the pull between desire, deception, and despair in the book, and what were you thinking as you were translating it? Like, it must have
I'm
been
probably thinking about the words. I'm sorry.
it must have been interesting to kind of uncover it all while you're translating it too.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is. It is always interesting. But the thing is, I think when you're translating, I'll just tell you this as a would-be translator. I mean, in a way, you're much more concerned with the book sentence by sentence than you are with what's actually, what's happened. I mean, of course, you're thinking about what's happening, but you're not. You're really more thinking about sentence to sentence, thinking of the problems of, how you're going to convey this or that word or sentence, or even I don't know, even or paragraph, or even idea. I'm trying to think of something like that. Well, for example, something in this book that it's been pointed out that's not much in the other books is the whole idea of religion.
Mm.
I mean, religion really comes into it. I mean, Roberto is someone who is a believer. And there's the character of the priest.
Yep.
There's the working class people the church is part of their life.
I think that's also true of Italian culture in general.
Well, yeah, I know, but the Neapolitan novels, religion, it's sort of taken for granted that there's the church, which is more of a monument. I mean, or a something, a part of the neighborhood, rather than a place where people really get involved with each other, where there's there's a priest, where there's a person like Roberto who comes and preaches. So I think that's a slightly different, adds another different point, element. I guess I got off the track here a little bit, but and the whole I hope this isn't giving too much away. There's a whole section where she talks about the Gospels, reading the Gospels. So there's it's interesting in that way. But again, I think that I'm more thinking about what's the best way to say this in English, rather than
Right.
what deception is going on here. I mean, not that I'm not aware of it, but there is a lot of, desire is deception in this book, in a sense.
It really is. Pretty much all the desire involves some deception.
Yeah. Either it involves deception, or it is deceptive, or
they're lying themselves about the desire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So what was your favorite scene in the book, or maybe one that you were particularly pleased with your translation effort after you finished it? Is there something that maybe like you really struggled with and you thought, okay, finally, I think I've understood this? Or...
Oh gosh, I don't know. Well, there is, in the beginning, there's this, and I'm not sure that I really resolved this, but in the beginning, you may remember there's well, I'm sure you do. There's the two families, the two middle-class family. There are two middle-class families, basically, and they're all having dinner. There's Giovanna's family, and then there's the family of her father's and of her parents' best friends, who have two daughters who are basically her age. And this is, I guess it's soon after her father has said that she's ugly, but she's in a bad mood. And the father of the other family uses a word. He describes her, and this word becomes a big deal in the scene. And so it's a word that has to be, in Italian, the word is arcigno, or arcigna, because it's applied to her. It's not a sort of literary word. I mean, it's a word, but it's a little bit odd. the 12-year-old, which she is then, I guess, might not know it, but might know it. And anyway, to find a word with the right nuances, that's the kind of thing that,
Right. Yeah, 'cause sometimes the language just doesn't translate directly, and
well,
phrases.
yeah, lots of times. I mean, that isn't that, yeah, right, right. But that's it's an example of like, what nuance are you going to use of that word? You know,
Right.
surly, sullen, grim, dour, you know, what's a word that's like not totally common, but not too uncommon, which
And a lot of
has some,
idioms and slang I imagined would just fall flat in our language too.
yeah, well, then there's that. Yeah, right. So,
So, my last question for you before I open it up for questions, is what recommendations would you give for language learners? People that are interested in learning the language, and would you any kind of language, but particularly maybe Italian. What would you have any tips for them on how to get started and how to think about it? And then I imagine that translating books or translating pieces of literature might also play a part in that, as far as the learning.
well, yeah, I mean, actually, the thing that, I mean, I learned in such a strange way. I mean, I don't have a good, I mean, there are tons of language things on the web, I mean, on the internet, and then, there's language classes everywhere. I suppose they're all on the internet now. But for me, the main thing that I did was reading. I mean, I just read a lot of books. And one of my recommendations is to read mystery books, because because the plot, you want to find out what happens. So you just kind of read quick. You don't have to look up all the words. I mean, you can look up as many as you want, but you don't have to look up all the words. I mean, once you have a certain basic, sense of grammar,
You get a sense
you
of
can just
it.
read, and it just gets the language going in your mind. So but reading in general is, I think, is a good way. And there's a lot of great writers who are not that difficult. I mean, Natalia Ginsburg is a great writer who writes in pretty simple sentences, short sentences. I don't know. Even someone like Primo Levi is actually a very straightforward, clear writer. I don't know. There's a lot of things you can read without trouble. Without it feeling like a lot of work.
The Kindle also is really nice in that you can download an Italian dictionary.
Oh yeah, right.
Then you can just press the word you don't understand.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, I started reading Harry Potter long before I was able to read it in Italian. I didn't realize how complex that book actually is once you start to translate it. Hey, I have a cat deciding that he wants to be part of a place where he shouldn't be. I apologize. Okay, so let's open this up to questions, because I see that there are a bunch in the chat. I'm going to go back up to the top, and let's see here. There's we asked if one of the questions was, have you ever met Elena Ferrante?
No.
Nope. That was an easy answer. Neapolitan,
as far as I know.
So Neapolitan dialect and culture play a very important part in Ferrante's book. So how do you deal with those voices? And did you immerse yourself in Neapolitan culture, and which happens to be something that actually is really different than a lot of other parts of Italy?
I wasn't really able to. I mean, I didn't have the opportunity to. I mean, I had been to Naples. Actually, I've been to Naples quite a few times. Oh,
get down from there.
I'll plug that. I've been to Naples in like the early 90s. I'd been to Naples a few times. So I actually had a sense of Naples. I mean, I hadn't been to a lot of places in Naples, but I'd been around Naples, and I had a sense of the city. I knew some people there.
I was supposed to go this year right before everything shut
Oh
down.
no.
Oh, I'm really heartbroken about that. Yeah.
And then in the last couple of years, I've also been back a few times. So, I mean, I think that I have at least to have a physical sense of the city, a sense of some of the monuments, some of the places, some of the neighborhoods.
That helps a lot.
So that helps. Yeah. But so, of course, ideally one would go and live there for a year, but I couldn't.
And she didn't use that much dialect in this particular.
She doesn't use dialect much at all. she uses a few words here and there, but when she says somebody said in dialect, she writes in Italian.
Which makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah.
Because I imagine too, she probably had some foresight, and the translation of the dialect is probably not all that easy.
Well, actually, I think it's even more to do with the fact that many Italians wouldn't understand it.
Oh, yes, that's true. Yeah, you
They-
can go just a
When
little.
they showed the TV show in Italy was shown with subtitles in Italian.
Wow. I haven't seen that yet, but I could imagine. Actually, a lot of Sicilian stuff is subtitled.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen that. Yeah.
My my husband's mother-in-law, his mother and his grandmother are from Puglia, and their words are completely different. Like their word for mouse is not topo, which is the mouse that we know for the word for mouse. It's like sorgia or something along those lines.
Yeah. I know that.
So it's interesting. But I'm sure that makes your job a little bit easier not having to deal with that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's see. We just read this book for our book club. This is from Margaret. We wondered, is this an earlier manuscript that she wrote before she became so popular?
As far as I know, no. As far as I know, it was written after the Neapolitan novels. I'm sorry?
It's so different. I think that might be
different. Yeah.
Do you read the whole book before you begin translating, and do you read it again in the translated form?
I don't always read the whole book before I translate it because lots of times I don't really have time because there's that thing called the deadline, believe it or not. I mean, you would think that a translation would not have a deadline, but they do sometimes. And there is a kind of immediacy about reading and translating as you go, which is kind of, at least for the first draft. And that's, it's sort of interesting. Wait, what was the other part of that?
Do you read it again once it's translated?
Well, I mean, in the sense that I read the drafts, yeah, definitely.
Probably multiple times.
Many times, yeah.
Okay, so Leo wants to know, how do you reconcile the meaning conveyed by the sounds of the words in the original language with the sounds in the translation?
Oh, well, that's absolutely impossible. No, I mean, you read out loud to yourself and try to make it, I mean, you can't make it sound it can't sound the same, but it could sound, it could have a similar sound quality, let's say.
Maybe the cadence.
I'm sorry?
Maybe the cadence of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the rhythm could be similar, or there could be some version of it, of the sound. Like, let's say, to take just a simple example, if you have some alliterative adjectives, let's say, they might not be the same two letters or two sounds, but they could be different sounds, but they would be the same. So you would have some kind of equivalency. And I'm not saying that that's always a good idea either, but
right.
But sometimes it is.
So then the next question is, are you a fluent Italian speaker? And do you think this is important for translation?
I'm not a fluent Italian speaker, so of course I don't think it's important for translation. I wish I was a more fluent Italian speaker. I mean, I can speak fine and I can get along, but I've never lived in Italy, so I don't really, I don't have that day-to-day fluency that I imagine I would have if I had lived there, or if I do live there, that I will get. But I know several other translators who don't have that kind of fluency, and I don't think it's not crucial if you read, and if you do listen when you're there, to hear, to
get this because the sound of it is sort of important, but to convey it in English, but you still have to understand it. If you understand it in Italian, it gives you ideas on how you can convey it in English.
Yeah, right.
I'm not sure if this question is complete enough, but how did translating the Neapolitan books carry over to this book?
Well, I mean, in a certain sense, every book carries over into all the other books that you do, because I mean, I feel like, even with a book that's not, let's say, not that congenial, you always learn something. So in that sense, that it carries over. But it's also true that Naples, the city of Naples is very strong in both. It's a slightly different Naples in The Lying Life of Adults, but it's still Naples. And so features of the city carry over, features of the language. I mean, the style of Ferrante's sentences, I mean, that kind of, run-on quality, that's certainly the same.
This particular, and just this kind of occurred to me, there really isn't a specific time frame for this book.
Well, there is actually, because she says it's the early 90s.
Okay.
3 years. I think it's 3 years.
Now it could be 20 years ago. I couldn't really figure it out.
She says somewhere what year she was born. I think she was born in like 1978, something like 79 or 80 or something. And then, so this is in the early 90s. And so, yes, it's a different Naples from the Neapolitan. I mean, a different Naples in the sense that it's not post-war Naples.
I figured it was pre-internet Naples, but
yeah, right.
Or like, before cell phones were.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, no, can you imagine this book with cell phones?
A lot of writers that write historical fiction in particular, or like they don't want to start with that age of cell phones, and particularly mysteries too, because once you start involving cell phones, it destroys so much of the mystery that there might have been.
Right. Oh yeah, I can imagine.
So did you feel the need to learn about the class culture?
I mean, I don't really know how one would go about that, actually. I mean, I think you just learn it from the books, maybe. I mean, I knew something about, I guess knowing something about it is helpful. From the other books, from other reading I've done by Neapolitan writers, having a little bit of a sense of it, of class culture in Italy in general.
Well, and I imagine you probably have a lot of the things you've read. You've said that you read so much.
I did. I've read a lot. I mean, I haven't read everything. There's a lot of things that are missing, believe me, in my Italian education. But I, I mean, I've read quite a lot.
How did you get involved with Ferrante's books?
Oh, well, the publisher of Ferrante, Europa Editions, is actually owned by, or was started by, an Italian publisher called Edizioni AO. And they were publishers of Ferrante in Italian. And around after 9/11, they decided that they wanted to publish books in English, to start an English publishing company. They'd done a lot of translations into Italian from a lot of Eastern European countries, actually. So they were translation was something that they were really focusing on. Anyway, the first book that they decided to publish was The Days of Abandonment. And they asked about, I don't know, maybe 5, they got sample translations from about 5 people. I didn't know Ferrante. I mean, I didn't know who she was. I had never read her. So they had this little competition, which I won. And
oh, wow.
I was very grateful.
Yes. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, since then I found out several of the other people who were in this competition. We sort of laugh about it, but yeah.
Oh wow, that was a nice, good bit of luck and skill combined. I'm imagining.
Well, it was. Yeah, I was very glad, because The Days of Abandonment is one of those books when you start reading it, you feel like,
right.
I got to do this.
Okay, let's see some other questions here. Why is the title not The Lying Lives of Adults, plural with plural? Was that a point of discussion between you and the author?
No, it wasn't. I think if lives was plural, it would sound like each adult had many lives. This is a copy editing question that comes up all the time. And there's not an easy answer. I mean, I think in this case, if you said The Lying Lives of Adults, it would seem as if each adult had several lives, rather than it's sort of the life of each adult or the life of all adults. I mean, it sort of has more of that quality, maybe. But I think lives would be peculiar.
Yeah, I can imagine some grammarians are probably like, a little itchy about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
how did translating Elsa Moronte's work compare with translating Ferrante?
Oh my God. Well, Moronte she's a difficult writer. I mean, not that Ferrante isn't, in a different way. I mean, she's kind of, well, actually, if you've read interestingly, the Arturo's Island, which is the book of hers that I've translated, it's also about a teenager, a coming of age story about a teenager, in this case, a boy. But it's got a similar kind of intensity, but her sentences are much more elaborate, much more, well, first of all, they're about a boy. It's a boy, not a girl. I guess that makes a difference. I mean,
Yeah.
you could call that the lying life of adults as well. I mean, it's a book about people telling themselves and each other many lies.
Lies make for great stories.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, every author is different. I guess that isn't really a very good answer, but her sentences are different. I mean, they're more descriptive, I would say. There's a lot more writing about places. Ferrante doesn't really describe places that much. She doesn't describe.
No, everything is
It's pretty minimal.
The characters. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot more geography, let's say, in Moronte.
I think there's 2 more questions. We only have a couple more minutes. One of the questions is, let me see. We've got time really for one more. You sort of answered that one. Okay, how about this? This one, I think a lot of people probably have seen a bit of a connection between the characters of the Neapolitan quartets, thinking about Lila and Linu, and what is your sense of how the connection what kind of connection do you think there might be, at least in Ferrante's mind, of the characters in the Neapolitan books and in the Lying Adults? There's definitely some parallels in the friendships that Giovanna has that could be paralleled in the Neapolitan books.
I don't know. I mean, I have an idea that she didn't think about that. That she
I could see that.
She is interested in relationships between girls, between women, and relationships.
And authors repeat themes without even realizing it.
Yeah, I think the themes are all, her earlier books also have a lot of similar themes, and so I don't really think she thinks of the characters as having any connection, really. I don't know. I don't like to say anything on her behalf. But
yeah, that's a tricky one.
I'm just guessing.
Okay, so I think we're pretty much out of time. Stacey, I don't know if you want to close us out, but I want to say thank you, Anne. I've personally just really enjoyed this conversation. I've been looking forward to it.
It was fun.
So, and I am just really inspired to do some of my own translating. And so it's wonderful to watch someone else who has been successful and hear how you got going on it.
Well, thank you. And I look forward to your translations.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Crystal, both. What a great and interesting conversation. We don't usually have translators for events, so this was definitely unique and a very interesting aspect that I think most of us don't know very much about. I don't think that most of us know that translators and authors don't usually work together. So that was really interesting. I thank you all for coming, and I hope you all enjoyed this event, and I hope that you all have happy holidays and stay safe. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.